Morning, everybody, and welcome to the Waterfront webinar on the future of data centres in the UK. We're going to particularly focus on the planning processes and policy needed to support an increase in data centre projects and possibly even beyond that into digital infrastructure generally. We are going to explore three themes, essentially. Is there an infrastructure in place to support an increase in data centres and the development of digital infrastructure? The planning processes around that for data centers, what are the requirements? What do we need going forward? Potentially, what's the impact of data centers now being declared critical national infrastructure? And how can we manage the ESG elements of data centers? How can we deliver these data centers without impacting emissions, be it scope 3, scope 2, etc.? I'm going to introduce the presenters. We've got three presenters coming up: Spencer Lamb, who's the Chief Commercial Officer from KO Data, Richard Marsh, who's a partner at TLT, and Emily Holton Walsh, the Principal Planner at Arup. So to kick things off, Spencer, if we can bring you up, I know you've got a short presentation. We'd like to hear from you first, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Hopefully my presentation can be viewed and is being seen by everybody. To add a bit of colour to Mark's introduction, I work for a what's known as a data centre developer operator called KO Data. And what in effect we do is acquire land, then source the power and the planning, and then design, develop, and then in turn operate the data centres. We have a number of sites in and around London, and we're in the process of also developing a site in Manchester as well. What I'm going to talk about today is the ambition of the government to realise AI training in this country and complement, in effect, what has been deployed historically, which has been driven in the main over the last 10 years by the large hyperscalers deploying cloud infrastructure to the west of London in Slough, Stockley Park, and Park Royal Acton. The government launched what's known as the AI Opportunities Plan at the beginning of the year. And from a data center perspective, the key kind of relevance with data centers in mind was this designation of what they've called AI growth zones in 5 locations across the country. And the ambition within those AI growth zones is to deploy meaningful gigawatts of compute capacity to support AI training. And it's a fantastic initiative. And as from an industry perspective, from the data center industry perspective, we welcome it and we embrace it. But there are some challenges to be able to actually realize it. The first of those, and probably the most meaningful of those, is the cost of energy. In the UK, the cost of energy is around 21 pence per kilowatt hour. And you may have heard in the States over the last 12-18 months that huge data center developments have been ongoing to the tune of gigawatts and gigawatts, with the likes of AWS recommissioning 3 Mile Island, a nuclear facility, to house data centers next to it to support their power demands through the AI training models that are being housed on the large GPU deployments within these huge 1 gigawatt data centers. For the UK to be and get anywhere near the appetite for the hyperscalers and the neo clouds to take the opportunity to deploy data center capacity and in turn the compute that resides within it in the UK, we must be much nearer on the electricity costs for those investments to occur. So for the government to realise their AI growth zone ambition and in turn the AI opportunities plan, they do need to do something about the cost of energy with some intervention to get it to a nearer parity level with what we see in the States. So for some clarity, a 1 gigawatt data centre in the UK will cost around 1.8 billion a year to power. In the States, it's around $500 million, and the Nordics is about 600 million. So at this point in time, the UK is not perceived to be a suitable home for AI training. And we've been working with the government and lobbying the government over the last 6 months through AI UK and other forums. They understand the challenge, and it would seem that they're working towards some end to resolve it. But really, we will have a very different landscape from a a data center deployment perspective if we don't have any AI training in this country. And that's depicted on this slide. So the yellow line depicts what we are hearing from the large hyperscalers of what they're likely to deploy in the country, in the UK over the next 5 years, before the end of the decade, without lower cost energy. And that will be servicing cloud computing and some AI inference to the tune of about 1 gigawatt of capacity. And that's a lot of capacity. If you look at what's currently housed in Slough, one of the largest data center locations outside the US. Currently Slough has around about 1 gigawatt in it today. But with reduced energy costs, we will see a significant demand increase to around 10 gigawatts. And obviously, if that does transpire, then we must work towards being able to facilitate it in the small country that we live in, by looking to do data center deployments in other parts of the country and working with the local planning authorities to realize that ambition. And then finally, before I hand back to Mark, just for some kind of numbers to provide some context, with only UK inference and cloud over the next 5 years, we're likely to see around £15 billion worth of data center investment and around 50 billion of compute investment, i.e. the compute that resides within the data centers. But with the 10 gigawatts being realized, then we're looking at around 150 billion of data center investment and 500 billion of compute investment, which is obviously material. So thank you all for your time, and I'll hand back to Mark.
Thanks, Spencer. Fascinating. Yeah, and obviously, you know, the government is keen on promoting investment in digital infrastructure and promoting. We've got the cost of power being a factor. What about data sovereignty? What about the fact that we do want to take advantage of data held within our borders? Does that play into it beyond the cost?
I think from our perspective, as a UK nation, data sovereignty is obviously key. And I would say that data sovereignty megawatts is included within the 1 gigawatt of capacity over the next 5 years. And that's fantastic. But if we want to be an AI training destination, i.e. equivalent to what we're seeing in America, and to enable the bright young things we have in our universities who are coming, and the fantastic AI startup ecosystem and the fantastic startup ecosystem that we have within this country, and become an AI global leader or maintain the third position that we have today, we must have meaningful AI training in this country. And therefore, we do need to see the reduction of energy costs, but to achieve that, because the government aren't going to pay for those hugely expensive AI training modules, i.e. all the GPUs. We need the hyperscalers and the neo clouds to come in with their investments to realize that ambition.
What about private wire behind the meter solutions? I mean, you mentioned the recommissioning of 3 Mile Island. There's a lot of talk about SMRs, etc. Is that an opportunity to reduce the base cost of the power, and is that something that the government is considering making easier?
I believe it is. I just think that the time scale to get that up and running in a meaningful fashion, and then obviously everyone there mentions SMRs and things of that nature, but they're not really going to be commissionable until the 2030s. And we are in a race at the moment. It's the next 5 years that will delineate who is the AI global leaders, and we will see what's going on in the Middle East, and they are making a march on us, and Europe unfortunately is being somewhat left behind. So unless we do something meaningful now and come up with some intervention to be able to link data centers to the existing grid, and carve out the data center as we have done for manufacturing, with lower energy costs, with maybe some subsidies, but being a bit more creative, maybe building large-scale data centers in Scotland where there's huge amounts of renewable energy that's being wasted today. And each bill payer, each energy bill payer, i.e. each householder, is subsidising those renewable energy plants to the tune of £45 per bill per annum, which is set to increase to £135 per bill per annum. So if you put data centres nearby where that energy is produced in Scotland, then that will reduce the cost to the consumer, whilst also realising the ambition of the government, but also increasing the opportunity to build more and more renewable energy plants in Scotland where they are viable, and they can feed into the grid through many different sources and provide 24/7, 365 energy.
Brilliant, thank you.
And one last point, sorry. our cost of energy is intrinsically linked to the highest cost of the incoming energy source, i.e. in this country it's gas. I think over the last 12 months, we have used as a nation 54% of renewable energy, which is much cheaper, but we're still paying the gas rate.
Okay. Something to be done there then.
Indeed, yes. I'll stop my rant now. Thank you, Mark.
No, carry on. So I am going to ask each of the panelists to a couple of questions after their sessions. But please, for those of you who are listening in, please do have questions. We're going to hold a Q&A session at the back end of this when the panelists have done their pieces. So have some questions in mind, please, and we'll have that debate and include your questions in there. So next up, we've got Richard Marsh from TLT, partner at TLT. I'll let Richard introduce himself a bit more fully. But Richard, over to you. I'm not sure if your camera's working.
No, yeah, I'm afraid for some reason the camera's not working, but hopefully it's the words, not my face, that will be of interest. So yeah, as you say, I'm a partner at TLT, national law firm, focused almost entirely on seeking planning for major infrastructure projects. That's across energy, commercial, data centers, transport as well. And so very much focused in this space. So what I'll briefly talk about today is the planning regimes for data centers, and also what is proposed by the current government. They've come in and brought in a huge range of reforms, and it's quite nice actually at the moment that the planning isn't necessarily identified as a major blocker on development. So here we go. So at the moment, the route to planning for data centers is the local TCPA planning route. So submitting your application to the local authority and for it to be a local decision. Those applications are decided in accordance with local planning policies, but also the national planning policy framework. And in terms of, I suppose, pros and cons of the regime, in an ordinary world, you would say speed if an application is determined in accordance with the timescales of 8 weeks or 13 or 60 weeks. And also it should work out cheaper, both in terms of application fees and also consultant fees. That's cheaper relative to a national planning regime such as the DCO regime. In terms of cons, most developers will have come across difficult local authorities where there's resistance to a development, and now for data centers that could be in relation to landscape and visual effects. Being located in greenbelts, obviously you need large amounts of land to site the data centers, and also things like water usage and energy usage. So there can be resistance by a local authority that could be whipped up by local opposition. And then there's also the fact that once an application goes to appeal, whether for non-determination or a refusal, then that also brings in an element of uncertainty in terms of timescales and overall decision. What's been positive recently is changes to the NPPF, so the National Planning Policy Framework, that now specifically refers to data centers. So paragraphs 86 and 87 in particular. So 86 states that planning policies should pay particular regard to facilitating development to meet the needs of the modern economy, including by identifying suitable locations for uses such as laboratories, gigafactories, data centers, and digital infrastructure. And then paragraph 87 goes on to state that local authorities should address locational requirements of different sectors, including data centers. In addition to that, there's been an update to Greenbelt policy and the introduction of what's called Grey Belt. Now that feeds into both the NPPF policies, but also national planning guidance. And we're also now seeing those policies coming through in appeal decisions in relation to data centers. So we've seen 3 relatively recently that that were delayed, I think, pending the introduction of these policies. The most recent one of those was 2 weeks ago. Two of them have been in Ivor, so Buckinghamshire, and the other Three Rivers District Council. The two most recent ones, there was a debate about whether the development was in Greybelt. Now, the idea of Greybelt is that it is technically in Greenbelt, but for a reason of it being previously developed land, or that it doesn't contribute to the purposes of the Greenbelt, that it should be considered slightly different, and then wouldn't need to demonstrate, or certainly wouldn't be considered an appropriate development in itself, and therefore wouldn't need to demonstrate very special circumstances in order to be granted consent. So all those decisions are extremely helpful for developers in getting certainty that even if they do find a site that's in Greenbelt or Greybelt, that they will have the support of the Secretary of State, and hopefully, as a result of the decisions, LPAs will be more inclined to grant rather than risking the costs of an appeal. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the current regime. So all leading very positively in a positive way to grant consent. In addition to that, the government in December made a ministerial statement to say that it would prescribe data centres and other things like gigafactories and laboratories as what are called business and commercial developments. And they are developments capable of being granted consent via the national planning regime, so the Nationally Significant Infrastructure Project, or DCO regime, projects that are decided by the Secretary of State. So the idea there is that even though a data centre in itself is not considered an NSIP, a Nationally Significant Infrastructure Project, it could be directed into the regime via a relatively straightforward process of applying to the relevant Secretary of State, and therefore go through this national planning process, which is a series of time-limited deadlines of pre-application, examination, and then consideration by the examiners and a decision by the Secretary of State. But it also has various other advantages in that it's decided by the Secretary of State, so removes the local politics. It's also what's called a one-stop shop, so incorporates all sorts of additional powers, so compulsory acquisition powers, which is unique for private developers, and the ability to include other things like stopping up orders and diversions, and various other permits. It's also got an extremely high success rate of circa 93-94%. Now, some of the disadvantages are that it is more expensive. That's both in terms of application costs and also consultant costs, and the overall process, when compared with a straightforward TCPA process, would take longer. But then with TCPA, obviously, you have the risk of a potential appeal. Now, it's not just this proposal in itself, but the government is bringing forward wider reforms to the national planning regime, the DCA process, and that includes a fast-track process to make the process even faster for certain projects, and also so not just a Section 35 direction to bring a project into the DCA regime, but also an opt-out. So even if your project a data center was co-located with a large-scale solar project or wind or SMR, you could apply to the Secretary of State to say, for whatever reason, that the project should be considered on a local level, which might be useful if the local authority is supportive of the development and there's no need for things like compulsory acquisition powers. So there are all sorts of ways in which, in roughly 6 to 9 months, data centers will be able to be consented, and we haven't even touched upon AI growth zones, where there obviously will be a major focus on data centers. The detail hasn't come forward yet. There have been the expressions of interests come in for consideration in summer this year. But in terms of additional planning flexibility there, these zones could be set up as either local development order areas or even special development order areas as designated by the Secretary of State, to give further flexibility and simplicity in terms of planning, and that could be permitted development rights for certain development, or even granting consent for the main data center site. So that information will come forward. But in short, I think we can all be confident that the government is doing all it reasonably can to make it as easy as possible to get data centers consented as quickly as possible, and that's both as standalone data centers, but also as co-located development. Okay, back to you, Mark.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my camera to work again, and it's come back. Great, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Much appreciated. I've got one question in for you at the moment. Does the TCPA apply to data centers of all sizes as they grow in size? Do you see this changing in the future as they get larger?
Yes. So I mentioned. So at the moment, it's TCPA is the only real show in town, unless there was some kind of special development order. But the plan is for data centers to be included as business commercial developments capable of being granted consent via the DCO process. Now we don't yet. So at the moment, there's a policy statement which dates from the early 2010s, which gives a bit more flavour as to what business and commercial developments are. So, for example, commercial development should be greater than 40,000 square meters. Football stadium should be greater than 40,000 seats. So that's what we don't yet know will apply to data centers. I should imagine 40,000 square meters might be appropriate. It might be based on the megawattage requirement. But so at that point we'll know what level, what scale of development will be appropriate for the DCO process. But even after that happens, it still might be possible to get a Section 35 consent from the Secretary of State if it can be demonstrated that the project is of national significance. And what is also helpful, the Section 35 application process is relatively straightforward. So whenever I've done it, and all other examples, it's a straightforward letter to the relevant Secretary of State attaching a plan and justifying why you, the developer, consider this particular project is of national significance and fulfills any other tests that will be included once an updated policy statement on data centers is introduced.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. I can see more questions coming in. Excuse me. I can see more questions coming in. We're going to hold them off for the panel session, so I'm going to give the opportunity to Emily to present her piece now. So Emily Holton Walsh, Principal Planner at Arup. You're up next, and then again we'll collect some more questions and we'll have a Q&A session at the end, including all three panelists. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. So I'm Emily Holton Walsh, and I'm a Principal Planner in Arup's town planning team in London. We work with data centre developers and promoters to secure end-to-end solutions to development, from due diligence and site acquisition stage through to securing planning consent and discharging post-consent conditions and enabling delivery on site. So planning for data centres, what are the requirements and what is the landscape? So the planning process for data centres, as Richard has touched on, is becoming increasingly complex, and the planning landscape and requirements are rapidly evolving. At the moment, we're seeing increased levels of public scrutiny around data centres, with a selection of headlines here demonstrating the general sentiment towards these developments. So members of the public are generally becoming more interested and somewhat alarmed about the level and the scale of growth. For members of the public, the utility and the purpose of data centres is often quite hard to grasp. Digital services are rather intangible compared to other types of infrastructure such as water or electricity services. However, as more of these buildings now appear across the country in previously green landscapes, the public are being confronted with the realities of our digital future. We've seen a recent surge in press coverage and public interest, and as you can see from these headlines, it's normally focused around the negative impacts, perceived negative impacts of the development, increasingly focusing on the impact on the green belt, water use, energy use, and noise. So we're experiencing an increased level of public opposition to data center planning applications. Arup recently submitted a planning application in central Bedfordshire for a new data center, and this attracted the attention of a national anti-big tech lobbying charity who actually attended planning committee in person to object to the scheme. So clearly there's opposition both at a local and a national level amongst members of the public to these sorts of developments. Within this context, local authorities who are determining planning applications for data centres, this might be the first time that an application of such a nature has crossed their desks. Very few, if any, local planning authorities have any specific policies within the local plan which consider data centres, and very few local authorities have proactively considered the need to plan for the location or the details of these data centres. So within this context, we're seeing a very reactionary approach to applications from local planning authority. Planning teams may not be adequately educated or informed about the specificities of data center requirements. Statutory and internal consultees on planning applications may seek to apply conditions which are either not applicable or not feasible for data center applications. There's often a lot of back and forth during the planning application stage discussing that level of detail. In addition, locally elected councillors who are obviously accountable to local members of the public are under a lot of pressure, and they may view the most popular option as being to object to the application, even if there's no sound technical reason to do so. So again, as Richard touched on, over the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen a large number of data center applications refuse planning permission at the local level. Next slide, please. However, we are seeing a step change at the moment and a shift towards a more interventionist government. So since the election of the Labour government in July 2024, as mentioned previously, Angela Rayner took the decision to recover 2 appeals. So this means that she took the decision-making powers into her own hands at Secretary of State level and took the power away from local authorities. The Chancellor has also stated that the government won't hesitate to intervene in applications where there's potential gain at regional and national level for the economy. So there's clearly a shift towards a more interventionist government at planning application stage. The 2 appeals that Angela Rayner recovered were subsequently and recently allowed. And as Richard said, there was a big focus within those on the grey belt. So it's perhaps not unsurprising given the context of Labour's recent planning reforms, as talked about earlier. And one of the biggies is the introduction of the grey belt. So grey belt land being land which is in the green belt, which is previously developed and only makes a limited contribution to the purposes of the green belt as a whole. So as mentioned in these appeals, there was a lot of debate about whether the sites counted as grey belt, and the conclusion was that they did. And this new policy really enabled these decisions to be made in a positive manner. So with the introduction of grey belt, development for data centres is no longer required to demonstrate very special circumstances, which is required to permit development in the green belt. So clearly the bar is somewhat lower now than it was previously. So not only is the introduction of the grey belt, in addition to the introduction of the reference to data centres in the new MPPF, a positive move for planning applications, but it could also signal a shift for local authorities in their plan making process, as it will require them to take a more proactive approach for planning for digital infrastructure through the local plan process. Next slide, please. So regardless of where the decision-making power lies, whether that's at local authority level or at central government level, we're seeing increasing complexity in the type of information that's required to support planning applications. So in the recent appeals, one key issue that arose was the need to demonstrate that there's been an analysis of alternative sites where the data center development could be provided. And if this is within Greenbelt, this is obviously an even more robust analysis that's required. So in the recent Abbots-Langley appeal that Richard referred to earlier, there was significant debate in the public inquiry relating to the need to site the data center within an availability zone, close to another parent data center, and about the size of the site that was required. So looking forwards, we're expecting there to be a greater level of scrutiny over site selection principles and locational requirements for data centers through the planning application process. As touched on earlier as well, we're also seeing increased scrutiny over water and energy supplies. So in terms of water specifically, water companies are recommending Grampian style conditions for housing development. So this prevents the occupation of homes until sufficient water infrastructure is provided. But we're seeing a move to extending this approach to data centers. Water companies aren't statutory consultees in the planning system, but they are becoming increasingly involved at planning application stage, often providing objections due to the lack of capacity within the network or perceived lack of capacity. And they're requesting the submission of paid pre-development inquiries, which is, in our experience, a lengthy process and can delay the planning application. It seems that local authorities are reticent to proceed to planning committee with these objections in place, and therefore we're experiencing delays due to these objections from water companies. It's important to highlight that this issue is something that should really be dealt with through planning conditions and obligations and shouldn't delay planning applications. So we think that it's really important that at application stage you can demonstrate that there is sufficient water and power supply, and to demonstrate to the local authority that the development and the approval of these data centres will not jeopardise the future provision of housing in the borough or the area, which is of key importance to achieving the aims of the local plan. So for those local authorities who are more receptive and more proactive in the planning, we're seeing increasing obligations through Section 106 agreements to secure the optimum public benefit. And this includes apprenticeships, paid work placements during constructions, local labour obligations, and obligations to transfer waste heat to district heating networks. On this last point, we do think that in the future there will be more emphasis on waste heat, and there will be increased need to provide feasibility studies at application stage to demonstrate that this has been considered in the design and, where appropriate, incorporated such that new district heating networks can be established close to these facilities. Clearly, given the level of public awareness and objection and scrutiny, there's really a need at the moment for a strong and demonstrable suite of public benefits to offset the perceived harm. For a data centre development that we are working on in West London, this included the provision of affordable workspace units, which are let to local businesses at a discounted local rent, and also the installation of a large public art facade, which you can see on the slide here, and is located adjacent to a public park and provides significant public benefits in the area. So in conclusion, planning for data centres is complex. The support offered for the development at national planning policy level is not yet matched by proactive planning at local level in our experience. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as Richard touched on, to better support growth in this area, there's a move to designate data centers as nationally strategic infrastructure projects. However, this is clearly not an instant process. In the meantime, working within the current context and the current system, to be successful, we really advocate for bringing the community along on the journey, making sure that they're involved in the design process and in elements of non-technical design to increase that sense of ownership over the buildings. Also, we believe in empowering local authorities. So through pre-application submissions, it allows the resource and the time for local authority officers to grapple with these new issues and to understand the technical specificities of data center planning. It's also crucially important to prepare a robust suite of technical documents to stave off any concerns that might arise during the planning process. In our view, as well as securing planning permission, this approach allows data center players to build and strengthen their brand and demonstrate their social responsibility. And it really helps to ensure that that intangible concept of data centers is translated into tangible local benefits and help reduce objections. Thank you. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks, Emily. So one of the questions we've actually got is about water. Interesting. The first question that came up was water, and you obviously mentioned water and planning permission. The water usage thing is interesting, isn't it? Because it's actually a US problem. It's not really a European and UK problem. The challenge with the US is they use a lot of evaporative cooling. In the UK and Europe, we tend to use closed loop cooling, which doesn't necessarily involve the evaporation of any water. The challenge in the US is that they're building data centers in deserts and depleting aquifers that take 1,000 years to recover. Whereas in Europe, ironically, we've been more cautious about Legionella, etc. And so we don't use a lot of evaporative cooling. Do the planning authorities realize that this is an American problem that's sort of bled over from the US rather than being a European and UK problem?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, I think that comes down to educating local authority officers on the specificities of data centers. At a recent planning committee, we did have a big debate on that issue. And we did explain about the closed loop systems and how the context differs here. So I think there is an increasing level of awareness, but I think at the moment we're working in an environment where these issues are new to local authorities and they don't have the benefit of sort of detailed technical consultants behind them to support them in learning about data centers. So I think we need to help them on that journey by providing sort of resource and time to allow them to educate themselves. Yeah,
there's been a couple of debates recently with the Environment Agency and DCIT about this specific topic. So hopefully they're beginning to get their heads around it. They'll begin. The other thing I was going to bring up, the first slide you put up there was all about the sort of negative media impact of the preconceptions about the sector and where we're getting it wrong. And we had we get quite a lot of this in the sense that there's an event in Ireland about 2 years ago where we had Extinction Rebellion turning up, complaining about data centers, and every single one of them had a camera and they were either live streaming or taking pictures. And of course, those pictures are going to the cloud. I don't think they got the irony that they were using data centers to both create their meetings and meeting up, but also to store the images. I think we've got a perception problem in the industry, haven't we? I mean, the building's not the problem. The building is merely a hotel. It's a bit like blaming tourism for creating hotels. I think we should be doing a better job of explaining that what sits inside a data center is actually what drives our entire either social or business activity, the cloud, our banking, our entertainment, etc. It lives in a data center somewhere. So it's not really the data center, it's more the IT load that's hosted within the data center, which is obviously from, other companies. How are we doing at getting this message across to planners and saying, it's not the building, it's actually the IT infrastructure that sits inside it?
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct there. We do have a problem in that regard. I think we're getting better at sort of translating that technical side of things into a way that officers can and members of the planning committee can understand. They can understand the benefits. I guess there is still a certain degree of NIMBYism. They might accept the benefits and the national sort of benefits of that, but they would prefer if it was not in their district and that they couldn't see it. So I think that's where this idea of having very local positive benefits as well, such as the art that we've incorporated on a data center and the sort of apprenticeships through planning obligations. If it's a more tangible benefit like that, I think it's easier to win over the hearts and minds of local residents rather than kind of appealing to that national economic big scale picture, although obviously that is critical as well.
Absolutely. I'd like to bring the other panelists in at this stage. And I see, Richard, you've got your hand up, but I think there's something you want to say on this subject as well.
Yeah, I mean, just touching upon that, obviously there's an awful lot of NIMBYism across the country, regardless of the technology, and we've seen a lot in solar and also wind, and now it's the norm for community funds to be provided to local communities to sort of improve the acceptability of those developments. So that's one potential avenue. Planning obligations, so Section 106 agreements, can also be used to mitigate the impacts of developments. As some people see those as a bung, but you can certainly shoehorn them into the statutory tests. And in relation to the education piece, that's something that renewable energy has done well over the last few years, to enable local communities to understand what the development is doing and how, as you say, it's benefiting the local communities and individuals. So there could be some sort of educational angle to a Section 106 agreement to allow for local schools or education establishments to understand how the development is working. Emily touched upon apprenticeships and local labour and potentially local materials, but that's not a huge not hugely exciting for the developer to have an absolute obligation. But there are all sorts of things that can be done to improve the acceptability of a project and do it early on in the process. So although there's not, in relation to TCPA applications, a statutory requirement to consult, clearly it's a benefit to the developer to get that dialogue going, to engage with the local officers, local communities, to make sure that when you do get to planning, that everyone understands the issues, and that things like water in a closed loop world don't cause an issue when it gets to committee. We saw a similar thing with solar and battery storage projects, where opposition groups jumped on an exploding battery, and that would be the norm across the world. So it really is about education, having the time to put together reasoned reports that demonstrates that actually the risks associated with water or any other environmental impacts are minimal.
Yeah, the water thing is really a red herring. I think it's the water companies trying to mask some of their own problems.
For sure.
Data centers are not the issue in the UK and Europe that they are in the US. It's a completely different set of technical designs. But going back to the point you, Richard and Emily made, surely we can do more within the community to make ourselves more attractive. I mean, you talked about district heating. If we can supply cheap or even free heat to either residential projects or in other industrial applications, or free internet or local college support, we have a skill shortage in the industry. If we were putting back into the community and making more of an effort to do so, do you think that would improve our chances on planning, etc.? Emily and Richard, I think particularly on, you've talked about this.
Yeah, I think that would definitely help. I mean, anything that has tangible local benefits, in our view, is beneficial to the process. I think local authorities who are more keyed into data centers are realizing that there is an opportunity to sort of to secure those public benefits there and are working proactively to do so. But elsewhere, I guess it would come down to the goodwill of data center providers to do that, and that's perhaps less common to provide those sorts of things through planning off their own back.
Yeah, I suppose it's easy for us plan consultants and lawyers to say, yeah, just kitchen sink it and provide everything in terms of district heating, potential links to local industrial facilities to provide heat, or a Section 106. But obviously, it all comes with a cost. So I think it's just something to be determined on a case-by-case basis. If you're looking to develop in an area where there will be significant opposition, both from the LPA and local communities, then that might be appropriate to develop a more sophisticated collection of community benefits and benefits for the LPA as well. But so I think it's probably worth listening to Spencer's thoughts on all these additional costs and how that impacts on viability.
Yeah, it's very generous of you to offer us up in that regard. Very grateful. I think Mark, you know, I've been in the industry a very long time, and I think it's now called an industry. It wasn't an industry before, and we have been very much under the radar. Our customers historically have tied us up in knots as to what we can say and who we can talk about and what we can say about the locations of our data centers. But that is changing. And I think the industry is in danger of having a very bad reputation unless we start to control the narrative. And if you are a resident in an area where there's a planning application going in for data centers, the first thing you do is Google data centers and Google the negatives of data centers, and what you come up with, they consume all your water, and we build them on greenbelt land, which unfortunately I think the Angela Rayner thing wasn't probably the best positive spin for the industry from a public perspective. So the industry as a whole needs to do a great deal better in communicating the data center brand more broadly and widely and educating it. So I completely agree with that. And I don't think we're doing a very good job at all today. I think we at KO Data try to, when we go into a new area, my marketing team will insist that I go in to present the planning application to the local councillors and planning team and things of that nature. So it's the actual people who work for the company doing it rather than the consultants and the planning consultants, etc., etc. We then knock on people's doors who immediately board the site and explain what we do, i.e. the KO Data staff, so they get a kind of ground up approach. And I think things like that and those initiatives are really key. And then when you do that, going through the process is far simpler in new areas that don't understand data centers. I think you have a challenge in existing rich data center locations like Slough, Stockley Park and Park Royal. But also on the flip side, a lot of the data center companies have come together and, you know, they invest and spend time in the University Technical College at Heathrow. So those sort of initiatives are underway, and money being spent. Time is also being spent to educate the kids within the college about what data centers are and what job roles they can have within them should they wish to do so. But there's a long way to go, and we live in a world where perception is king rather than reality, as we're all starting to realize. So we need to drive that branding of data centers in a far more positive light, and we should be more conscious of focusing on building on former brownfield sites rather than trying to do this green belt thing, because a property, and this is the thing that probably makes, I think this is the biggest issue. It's not the data center companies, it's the property landowners who are trying to flip land into data center developments and make obviously a significant return in that process, rather than the data center companies themselves. And I think a lot of the planning applications that are going in at the moment that are upsetting people are on the property owners who are trying to convert into data centers with a power connection and making a lot more money than it would be if it was a logistics site or residential, whatever it might be.
I think, Spencer, you've touched on something really important there. For us as planning consultants, we're often bound by a certain degree of confidentiality about who the end user is, or as you've said, if it's being promoted by a landowner, it's often in outline form. There isn't an end user user. So we're not able at that stage to pick up on these wider programs that the operator might have in place, support to local schools and universities, those sorts of things. They either don't exist at that stage, or we're not able to disclose them, and therefore like, the package of benefits doesn't appear as vast as it is in reality.
Yeah, and there's many of us with the AI Growth Zone initiative, with the AI buzz and excitement. It's becoming more and more of a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people flipping powered land, and yeah, exactly. It is becoming a challenge, and you know, dare I say, there's an awful lot more capacity being considered than will ever actually be taken up, and I think that's another one of the challenges we face as a sector. You know, I call, there's this term braggawatt. You know, lots of people saying they're building these very large data centers, which will probably never ever either happen or be fully populated. So I think, you know, we're doing a very, very poor job of representing ourselves by some of the statements that are being made by projects that may never happen.
Yeah. So I've got a lot of feedback, apologies. There are a number of those which do muddy the water and harm the reputation. And it's increasingly becoming a problem. Yeah,
completely agree, Spencer. And whilst you're there, Spencer, we had a question about citing locations in Scotland, and was that a problem with latency? Obviously with AI learning, you know, training, that's not going to be a problem because it's largely a batch process, but I think the latency thing can be overstated. Comms are important, but latency not necessarily, because not every application needs low latency.
Yeah, we've got 7 minutes left, so I won't go into too much detail, I promise. So I'll answer it this way. The UK has only one region for the hyperscalers, which is in the southeast of the country, which was deployed accidentally because there was some availability of data center capacity in Slough back in 2015 when they started marching over. And that's where it started. It wasn't done through any design. It wasn't done deliberately. It was done because there was a bit of capacity, and therefore they placed their availability zones. And they're very restricted as to where the other two availability zones can go from a distance perspective. They are servicing businesses in Scotland from that location in the southeast of the country, and they could do the same from Scotland to London. So there is no problem with we are a small country. If you go to somewhere like Australia, the hyperscalers have to deploy in Sydney. They have to a region with 3 availability zones. They have to in Melbourne. They have to in Perth. They don't do it because they want to do it, because technically they have to do it. In the UK, they could have a region anywhere in the country. So and that's the problem. The reason why we've got so much activity going in the west of London is because they are reticent to move elsewhere because of the cost of creating a new region in other parts of the UK.
Thank you. I think that's an important point, and a lot of people really fully appreciate. Yeah, thank you. Final question to all of you. We are now designated as critical national infrastructure. That came in, what was it, sort of September or so last year. So we're practically a year in. Has it made any difference, and will it continue to make any difference? Probably to Richard and Emily. Well, I know, go ahead, Spencer. Carry on.
We haven't seen. We were dealing with CPNI prior to the designation, so we've had them around the site, things of that nature. We're still awaiting their visit, if that makes sense, if it's going to happen. We were told when we did meet them 18 months ago, 2 years ago, that the standard that they saw was suitable and they were happy with it. But we've not seen any kind of initiatives instigated to work through what the data center design is, any suggestions of what we should be doing in the future, and things of that nature.
And Richard and Emily, on the planning side, my understanding is that one of the reasons for bringing in the CNI designation was to make planning easier. Has it had any impact in that respect?
In my opinion, it's had very little impact. I think the bigger impact has come through the revisions in the MPPF that Richard outlined earlier, and those appeal decisions that are material considerations in planning applications now. I think the designation as critical national infrastructure has helped kind of bolster the need case for data centres nationally, but I don't think in planning terms it's had much of an impact on the determination of applications.
No, but I'd agree with that. But it might help when it comes to the Section 35 directions. If a project wants to go the DCO route to demonstrate that national significance. In addition, at the national level, in relation to low carbon, excuse me, low carbon development, there is the concept of critical national priority infrastructure, which applies to that energy infrastructure. And in that case, there's a presumption in favour of that infrastructure. So, to my mind, that should also apply to data centers. So it doesn't at present, but again, it all adds to the case for development. But at present, it's not a huge factor.
Thank you. Final question to each of you. We've got 3 minutes left, so a minute each. What would be your on your wish list? What would be your ask of both either national or local government in terms of making this whole process easier, be it planning, be it development? What's on your wish list? What would you ask for from local and national government? Spencer?
I just want them to reduce energy costs so we can actually become an AI training destination. So, and then we'll have all the problems, but then we'll move data centers into other parts of the country, onto brownfield, large former steelwork sites and things of that nature, which will be the right things to do in the right locations where you'll get local support because you'll be creating jobs. And I think then the data centers will become a good thing and will be seen as a leading light. That would be my wish.
Yeah, I find it astounding that north of England and Scotland hasn't been more, active in terms of data center development. It's happening, but slowly. Emily,
it's a small ask from Spencer. In terms of consenting, I think we need to invest more in planners in this country. So we need to upskill planners. We need more planners in local authorities. We need to really ensure that our local authorities have the resource needed to tackle this challenge.
Brilliant. And finally, Richard.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and it's been resolved to some extent in the DCO regime with sort of the proper funding of stakeholders and local authorities, but more can be done, and there are all sorts of issues across developments from solar to data centers where applications have been held up as a result of local resources. My other point, I think the government's doing a great job to make it easier to get planning, whether at local level via appeals or DCO. With the AI growth zones, I think everyone would support the use of local development orders or special development orders to make it even easier, and to make sure that, as Spencer said, we retain that attractiveness as the UK is a great place to do business, and that we remain a leader in data centers and AI.
Great note to end on. Thank you very much. We're on the hour, literally, so perfect timing. It just remains for me to thank Waterfront for hosting this webinar and making this information available. Great session, some really useful information coming out of it. I'm not sure if this webinar is going to be made available by Waterfront, but I'm sure they'll let you know. There are some unanswered questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get round to everything, but I think there may be some answers coming out offline on those. And then finally, thank you, Spencer, Emily, and Richard, for a very entertaining webinar and some fantastic information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you, Mark.